When people talk, listen, man, I'm going to raise that red flag.
This narrative, especially after 1 year.
1 year.
One bad year. It's one big splash move. And because I don't think people understand how much cap space we can create.
Alex, I want to ask you, because you're a very humble person.
And I'm never going to be right about anything.
Yeah.
I was right.
What's up, everyone? Back again. Today I'm going to. So before, when I was talking about the boom bust rate, right? We're all about stats, and that's not what we care about. We want to go to the playoffs. Basically, we want to go to playoff games. We want to win playoff games. We want to win the Super Bowl, right? So what I did, because it's so much data, I didn't want to go through the whole first round. I'm not caring about the whole first round anymore. We have the 8th pick. And here's what I know. I know we desperately need wide receiver, edge rusher, which in my opinion, those are the two. It's going to come down to those two, in my opinion. But I'm putting everything out there, right? Wide receiver, edge rusher, cornerback, safety, tight end, and defensive tackle. I'm one of those. I'd be like, could you imagine we just go running back the 8? No, it will be wide receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle, safety, cornerback, or tight end. So I went all the way back to 2010, and I looked at the first 8 picks, because we had pick 8, that were those picks over that time, and looked at how many years it took to go to the playoffs after you were drafted. So like 1 is you go as a rookie, 2 you go the year after, so on. And that's how I charted it. The reason I went back to 2010 is because there's so many reasons why. Like, somebody could have moved up to 8. Somebody could have had 8 for 3 years and they were those Super Bowl champions. Like, some people could have drafted this as the very last piece to blah, 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 blah. Like, Nick Bosa, that 49ers team was excellent, but they had so many injuries. They just couldn't win games. I think that might be the Nick Mullins era of, I can't remember exactly, but I remember that be a good team, and they just got killed with injuries. So I needed to gain more data to make sure those outliers both ways kind of, didn't affect the overall percentages. So really quickly, I learned that defensive tackle isn't a priority. Like, it's not, neither is safety, neither is tight end, but I'm putting those aside because defensive tackle is such a hard thing to say what a defensive tackle is, right? Because a 3-4 defensive tackle is really different from a 4-3 defensive tackle. Like, the Derek Browns of the world are very different than the Vita Veas of the world, which are very different than the Aaron Donalds of the world. Like, it's so hard to put those into a box. It is with edge too, but for the most part, edge is there to get pressure on the quarterback, which defensive tackle is. It's all nuanced, right? It's all dependent on the system, but really quickly you learn that it's so hard to put defensive tackle in any sort of box. Because we have really fast, you see Derek Brown and Quinnen Williams, who are both Pro Bowlers, drafted in the top 8, and they've never been to the playoffs. So I just took defensive tackle out because it was too hard to conclude anything through them, right? Like, wide receiver, you're there to catch the ball, get yards. Edge, you're there to sack the quarterback. Cornerback, you're there to stop their receivers, get interceptions, throw the ball over, yada, yada, yada. Tight end, you're there. If you're an elite tight end, you're there to catch passes. Safety, you're there to stop the run. I mean, it's very more specified what they're supposed to do than defensive tackle. So I just took defensive tackle out altogether. So I just charted. The way I charted it is 1, you go to the playoffs that year. 2, you go to the playoffs the following year. 3, and I only go up to 4. Because honestly, by 4, like the whole team's different anyways. If you change teams or get traded, they're saying that whatever, I didn't want you. If you get traded to a team that goes to the playoffs, it doesn't count. You get a 0. If you go beyond, it takes more than 4 years to get to the playoffs, you get a 0. If you just don't play anymore and you never go to the playoffs, you get a 0. So you're not elevating the team that drafts you to the playoffs. It's kind of like the whole thing behind this. If you're going to be a top 8 pick, because when I think about the Panthers' goal, I want you to make the playoffs. I want you to, if you're going to be a top 8 pick, because we need to do it sooner rather than later, I need to know that this pick will boost us to the playoffs. That's the whole logic behind this. And it's kind of just fun, right? So I charted it, and in the top 8 picks in the last, I didn't include 2024 because we don't have enough data. So I started 2023 and I went back to 2010. So that's 14 years. 22 edges were taken, 13 wide receivers, 13 cornerbacks, 2 tight ends, and 1 safety. What I immediately see is the NFL values edges. The NFL, 22 to the next one being 13. Edges is, and I'll tell you why when I get to it. Edges are important to every single team. What this tells me, so 22 and the next closest was 13. 1, I'm pretty confident that if I get an edge in the first 8 picks, they're going to work out. 2, there's a ton of them because I'm getting 2, 3 every year in the first round, in the first 8 picks. 3, I'd rather draft them than pay them. Because if I have all these, that means that player can be good right away, and I don't have to pay the one that is older. So it's almost like an elite version of running back. Except for running back, you know that you can get them later. These are basically telling me if you need an edge, just get them early and you'll hit. Okay, does that make sense? A little bit? Anyway, so the league's basically telling you that if you need an edge, draft them in the first 8 picks, right? But does edge actually affect winning? So of the 22, only 4 don't make the playoffs with the team that drafted them. So what did I just say? Your hit rate is astronomical in the first 8 picks. If you get like the top 1 or 2 edge rushers in the draft, your hit rate is insane. I mean, just do the quick math. I mean, I can do the math on my calculator, but say that 22 is 20 and 4 of them don't hit. It means you have an 16 out of 22. That's 80% hit rate. Add 2, you're talking about 85% hit rate. So you're gonna get to the playoffs within 4 years, 85% of the time, if you draft an edge in the first 8 picks. 6 of the time, it'll happen that rookie year. So 6 over 22, simplify it, 3 over 11. So you're saying that around 30% of the time, drafting an edge will take you to the playoffs. 30% of the time. You have a 1 in 3 chance. As one of the worst 8 teams in the league, you have a 30% chance to make the playoffs after drafting an edge. 5, So 5 is in year 2. So that means 11 of the 22 will get you to the playoffs in the first 2 years. That's a 50% hit rate. And then 4 in year 3. So then 15 over 22 is a 75% hit rate, basically. And then year 4, 3 of them will go. So 18 of 22 edge rushers drafted in the first 8 picks over the last 14 years get you to the playoffs 18 out of 22 times. That's kind of changing my mind. I mean, that's insane. Panthers haven't been to the playoffs in, what, since 2017? So you're looking at 8 years? And I'm telling you we can be there in 4 years? Within 4 years? Almost certainly? If we draft an edge? That's good. It really is good. But let's look into it a little further. So looking at edge, Will Anderson in 2023. CJ Stroud was drafted before him. So is it him or is it him along with CJ Stroud? And then you're looking in 2022, Trevor Walker was the first pick. But the year before, Trevor Lawrence was picked. Is it him or Trevor Lawrence? And then you kind of go and you go and you go. Washington, Chase Young. Now, that kind of seems like Chase Young. I mean, 2020, that was, I don't remember who was quarterback then, but Kirk Cousins maybe? I don't know. But Washington wasn't good. And Chase Young got picked, second pick, and they went to the playoffs. Nick Bosa, second pick, went to the playoffs. Maybe it was him. Colin Farrell, year 2, he took the Raiders to the playoffs. I mean, Myles Garrett, year 4, but that was on the back of Baker. Joey Bosa was a third pick. 3 years later, Herbert got drafted. So I could go in farther and say, was the quarterback the catalyst or was the defensive end the catalyst? I'm going to look over the overall data because usually when you have that big of a sample size, the data is always going to work out the same. So you got an 18 over 22%? I'm just going to look at what that is. You got an 82% chance to hit if you draft edge in the first round. And in the first two years, it's a 50% chance that you hit. Only 4 don't make the playoffs with their first. And I mean, that's including somebody like Bradley Chubb, right? Because Bradley Chubb didn't make the playoffs with the Broncos, but then he did with the Dolphins. So, man, elite edge, especially in an elite edge class. Oh, geez, man, I'm changing my tune. I mean, you're talking about you're so close to 100% hit rate already, and then you have a great class. So let's move on. So wide receiver also had 4 that didn't hit. So wide receiver being second, what does that tell me? What can I learn from wide receiver being 13 are in the top 8? What I can learn is it's more specified on need, right? It feels like edges, if you don't know what to draft an edge. That's what it kind of feels like. Wide receiver seems a little bit more focused, more like specified. So, wide receiver, 4 of the 13 didn't make the playoffs with the team that drafted them. 4 happened in the first year. and 3 in the second year. That's 7. And then it kind of goes, it basically becomes either you hit or you miss. Because 7 happened in the first 2 years, 0 happened in the third year. So you have 7 over 13, 54% chance to go to the playoffs with your wide receiver. You have a 50% chance to go to the playoffs with your edge. So those two are like basically the leaders in the building of just draft those two. If you already have your quarterback, the league's telling you 22. If you don't know who to draft an edge. If you need a wide receiver, draft a wide receiver. Because it's 50-50 to have them be the catalyst that boosts you into the playoffs. This isn't just like they're going to hit as in they're going to be good players. These guys will lead you to the playoffs. 54% of the time, wide receivers will take you there in the first 2 years. 50% of the time, it'll be edge, but edge almost always hits in the long run. Where wide receiver, it's either they're great or it's so hard to hit wide receiver, which is why people pay such a premium for them. Because you usually don't find them late. So this just confirms what if you follow me, what we've talked about before is that analytics say go wide receiver or edge, especially if you need them, and we need both. So 8 has to be wide receiver or edge analytically. So let's look at cornerback, because 13, same as wide receiver, drafted in the first 8 picks. 6 of them never went to the playoffs with their first team. 1 of them went to the playoffs year 1. So if the Panthers' goal is to go to the playoffs next year, they have a 8% chance to make that happen if they draft cornerback. And 8%. And I'm just going to look to see who that cornerback was. You know who it is? It's Eric Berry from the Chiefs, who was drafted as a cornerback, but played most of his career as a safety. So you can even take him out of it, and you have a 0% chance, because he's technically a safety, I guess. When he played most of his career as a safety, he was drafted as a cornerback, but he played most of his career as a safety. So then you say 0 will take you to the playoffs the first. 0% chance of the last 14 years. You have a 0% chance to make the playoffs the first year you draft a cornerback. Second year, you have 2 of 13, which is a 16% chance. And then year 3, you have 3 of 13. So you say, so in the first 3 years of being a cornerback, you have a 40% chance to make the playoffs within 3 years. And I just told you, you have a 54% chance to make the playoffs in the first 2 years with a wide receiver. 0. Even if you say Eric Berry is a cornerback, if I just take this data back to 2011, it doesn't matter. It's still a 0% chance. I like Will Johnson as much as the next guy. But we have 13 times we've seen this happen. 12 over the last 13 years. And none of the corners, Patrick Surtain, J.C. Horn, Stingley, so many great corners. Patrick Peterson. And none of them went to the playoffs year 1. And that is our goal. If Canales doesn't go to the playoffs this year, it is very unlikely that he's going to be in Carolina for 4 years. I've already had an episode about this. It's unlikely that he's going to be here 4 years anyways, but especially if he doesn't go the first 2 years, he has to go to the playoffs. I would be shocked if they draft cornerback. Tight end, there's been 2 drafted in the top 8. 2. Kyle Pitts and Hockenson. 2 in the last 14 years. Neither one of them made the playoffs with the team that drafted them. Hockenson was traded year 3, I believe, to Minnesota, so he eventually went to the playoffs. He's never won a playoff game. Kyle Pitts has never been in the playoffs. So you have a 0% chance of hitting on tight end in the first 8 picks for the last 14 years of data. So do not draft tight end based on data, based on historical data. You sure? I mean, believe in Tyler Warren. I believe in all these guys. I believe in him too. I like him too. But it doesn't affect winning, or hasn't affected winning. And in safety, if we want to include Eric Berry, then he would be the second safety drafted in the first 8 picks in 14 years. When people talk, listen, don't be the team that drafts safety at 8 when no one else does it. So if we consider, sure, let's say Barry's a safety. So in the last 13 years, 1 safety has been drafted in the first 8 picks. Jamal Adams, he went to the Jets and left. He's gone. Never won a playoff game. Never went to the playoffs. So we've learned, if we want to go to the playoffs in year 1, being next year, do not draft a safety, do not draft a tight end, and do not draft a cornerback, because you have a 0% chance, based on historical data, to make the playoffs. But within 2 years, you have a 54% chance to make the playoffs if you draft a wide receiver. You have a 50% chance to make the playoffs if you draft a defensive end. So you could say 0, or you could say coin flip. Unless you think that like the tight end, safety, whatever, is unbelievably better than the wide receiver or tight end that's next available on your board, don't do it. It has to be edge or wide receiver as far as needs. I mean, if we needed a quarterback, you go quarterback. Or if we needed a offensive tackle, you go offensive tackle. But we don't. I don't think we need those. But I wouldn't put anything past the Panthers. So after this, just because I was curious and I wanted to, I don't have a ton of data on this, but I looked back at last year's free agency, and I looked at every free agent or traded player to get a contract of $10+ million. And I came up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 19 players got a $10 million a year or more contract that are, because I said we ain't doing tight ends, cornerbacks, or safeties. So that's only wide receiver, defensive end, and defensive tackle, or edge and defensive tackle. So 19 of them went to different teams. These don't count as extended players like Nico Collins or Devonta Smith or, Brandon Knight, whatever it is. These are new contracts on new teams, whether it's via trade or via free agency. With just that data, 2 of 7 wide receivers made the playoffs, and 4 of 9 defensive ends made the playoffs. What does that mean? Just immediately, you can just say, then I'm going to get defensive end in free agency because I'm more likely to hit. So then I go further, and I say, let's take trades out of it. No trades. With no trades and just free agents, 4 of the 7 defensive ends went to the playoffs. Or edges went to the playoffs. That's over 50%. If you get a great, and this is, they're getting market price. It's not like they're overpaying for. If you get a edge that is worth $10 million or more, then you will have an over 50% chance to go to the playoffs. And then, just to go even farther, there was 3 edges that made $15 million or more a year. Hunter, Armstrong, and Renard. 3 edges. All 3 went to the playoffs. So, if there is an edge out there that is worth 15 million or more based on just last year's data, you have a 100% chance to go to the playoffs. So, that means go get Josh Sweat. Just based on this data. This isn't me but 100% is 100%. Just like 100% chance that corner won't take me to the playoffs their rookie year. 100% chance that if I get a Josh Sweat worth $15 million plus a year via free agency. I know Brian Burns got it via trade, but I'm just going via free agency. If there is somebody that has hit the market, you better go freaking get them. And then you look at receiver, and you say, let me take trades out, so no Keenan Allen, no Stephon Diggs. And you're basically left with Judy, didn't make the playoffs. Mike Williams didn't make the playoffs with the Jets. Calvin Ridley didn't make the playoffs. Gabriel Davis didn't make the playoffs. Darnell Mooney didn't make the playoffs. And the only one you're left with is Hollywood Brown at $11 million a year, which is like when we went to the Chiefs. So you're looking at basically free agent wise without any trades. You're likely not going to make the playoffs if you get a free agent wide receiver. Granted, none of these are elite guys. If you can get T. Higgins or Garrett Wilson, all this goes out the window because that just turned everything on its head, right? Because those guys just don't come available, right? Cardinals got DeAndre Hopkins in his prime; they went to the playoffs. Eagles got AJ Brown in his prime; they went to if you can't get an elite one, get the elite one. I mean, you're pretty much 100% chance to go to the playoffs in there. Like I'm not talking about Devontae Adams going in his 30s to the Raiders. If you can get a elite player in his 20s on the market, that's why 49ers were like, we ain't trading Ayuk. Get the heck out of here. Miami's like, we'll trade Tyreek Hill now when he's pushing 35. And that's why the Chiefs were like, yo, if you want Hill, better come correct. Because just think about all the trades for prime wide receivers as far as elite, like Stephon Diggs, they went to the playoffs immediately. Tyreek Hill, Dolphins went to the playoffs immediately. AJ Brown immediately. DeAndre Hopkins immediately. trying to think. Amari Cooper went to Dallas immediately. So if we just go by percentages, don't get second-rate wide receivers, because we see Darnell Mooney didn't do anything for your team, basically. Keenan Allen didn't do anything for your team. Hollywood Brown missed the whole year, and they still went 15-2. Calvin Ridley, worst team in football. Gabriel Davis, worst team in football too, I guess. Stephon Diggs got hurt immediately. Jerry Jeudy, one of the worst teams in football. Mike Williams ended up getting cut, I think, or did he get traded? I don't know. Definitely wasn't worth it. So if you're going to spend money, do not trade for a defensive end. Get the defensive end in free agency. Do not bring in less than wide receivers. Get elite wide receivers. And if you can't, then get them in the draft in the first 8 picks. Because you'll have a 54% chance to go to the playoffs in the first 2 years. So analytically, if the same value of free agent is available, so just say like T. Higgins is off the table and the next available one is Darius Slayton, or like, don't do it. Don't use that cap on him. Use the cap on the 15 million plus edge, because that's proven 100% of the time, just for last year's data. 3 of 3 went to the playoffs when they did that. And then use your draft pick on a wide receiver, the first 8 picks, you'll have a 54% chance to make the playoffs in first 2 years. Or, so basically, in conclusion, because I know I've kind of just talked just talked a lot. Your options are trade for an elite receiver, which is basically T. Higgins or Garrett Wilson kind of player. Do not bring in Darius Slayton or Elijah Moore or secondary receivers. So that is your first goal. If you do not get free agent, if you are not able to trade for an elite wide receiver, you spend 15 million plus of cap to go get an elite edge, because you'll hit 100% of the time. So spend that on edge. Then you have your edge, or you have your wide receiver. Whichever you don't get in free agency or via trade, you select the other one at 8. You see where I'm going? And do not, under any circumstance, draft tight end, safety, or cornerback. I'm just going, this is just numbers. Like, this is the numbers are the numbers. I'm not trying to, I'm changed my mind. I want to draft defensive end or edge now. I wanted to draft wide receiver. But then looking at free agency, the most likely thing that the Panthers, I think, will do is get a stud free agent edge and draft a wide receiver. The second most likely thing they do is out of nowhere trade for a stud wide receiver and get an elite edge at 8 if they're competent. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.